Well, my name's Rose Iovannone, and I am living in Tampa, Florida. I am a faculty member at the University of South Florida. And so my areas of interest are functional behavior assessment, developing behavioral interventions for those students, and you work with school-aged students and work with schools a lot, for the students who have the most significant and serious problem behaviors. That's where most of my research is on the interventions that support them, as well as on supporting students with autism spectrum disorders. Those are my two main areas. Now my talk tomorrow, though, is on positive behavior support and embedding some culturally reflective practices into PBS. And that's another passion of mine, is to think about how we can just develop a culture in which we respect and dignify everyone, not just one culture or the culture that seems to be in authority. Well, the way to get PBS teams, or teams in schools especially, and this can be applied to adults as well in other areas, but the buy-in piece is a real big piece for positive behavior support, or PBS, especially in line of there's so many initiatives that are present in all schools, either coming from the government or from some other source. And yes, they will see, schools often, teams will see, why should we do this when we have all these other things to do? And one of the things that's interesting, especially in America, may not be so much here, although I have a feeling it's still the same, is that sometimes behavior is not the most important initiative. There's a philosophy in that people think children should come to school already knowing how to behave. And that makes it less of an initiative, because what school teams see this as is that we have to concentrate on improving reading and math scores. And what does behavior have to do with that when we have to focus on these academics? But yet there's enough research now that shows that behavior and academics are interactive. They're very, very intertwined. And that if you have students who have problem behavior, some of those behaviors may be a result of poor academic achievement, or behaviors interfere so much that they can't show academic achievement. So showing data that, and we do have some of this in the States, in which when school districts do positive behavior support, when we compare those schools to schools who aren't doing positive behavior support practices, we'll see in general an increase in academic achievement for those students in those schools where they're doing positive behavior supports, either by having better attendance, better grades, better performance on state assessments. So there's some support saying positive behavior support actually can enhance some of these academic initiatives that they're doing. The other thing we do is we make sure that if there's competing initiatives, rather than working harder instead of smarter, one of our things of positive behavior support when we train and we do some of our first trainings is, let's think about what are all the committees your school currently has, and what kind of topics are these committees charged to do. And they'll find out that there may be 3 or 4 committees that actually are very similar in what their outcomes are being. So they might have a discipline committee, they might have a positive culture committee, they might have a behavior committee, when all 3 of these committees could actually be combined. And so they're working what we call smarter instead of harder. So now there's less initiatives or less people serving on committees. And we're doing one in which we can provide supports. And finally, if in the United States we use what are called district initiative plans, or district improvement plans, and school improvement plans. We really support having people have behavior as one of their goals in both the districts and the states. And therefore, once that's in your mission statement or your goal, now it becomes an initiative that the administration at the district level, at the school level, puts a lot of importance on, which could get more buy-in. So speaking of mandates, government mandates to either hopefully enhance or inhibit the process of getting positive behavior support, there's 2 trains of thought about that. If we didn't have government drivers or mandates, I'm not sure in the United States we would have desegregation. I know that a lot of us think that people have goodness in their hearts, and I think in general most people want to do the right thing. However, people interpret the right thing very differently. And there are times when it becomes something that's going to be a significant shift in practice, such as positive behavior support. You may need a little bit of a push from somebody, because if we wouldn't have had in the States, there's a lot of legislation that doesn't require positive behavior support, but mentions positive behavior support as one of the key practices. We see an increase when we start getting those mentions from federal agencies or federal governments, that more people are willing to do positive behavior support or hear about it or start implementing it. So I think it's very important for those kind of drivers to happen when we're not seeing people voluntarily pick up these initiatives or these approaches, such as positive behavior support. Where it would hinder is if the government gets so involved that they say, you know, unless you do this, you're going to have this funding pulled or that funding pulled. In a way, setting people up to be punished for not doing it. I'm a behavior analyst. That kind of goes against my grain of we get more out of people if we reinforce them for doing things as opposed to punish them for not doing certain behaviors or using negative reinforcement to have them escape the aversive by increasing their behaviors. So I would prefer to see if the government, if they're going to do drivers or initiatives or mandates, that they think about how we can actually sweeten the pot for those people, providing more support. So when you do this, you may get more funding support, you may get other kinds of things that will happen that would also just add to, they're going to get great data that will show this works. They're going to also be reinforced and rewarded and recognized. And I just think it would help rather than the threat of you're going to defund. Well, the issue about taking behavior out of the term positive behavior support is interesting because I have not heard about that in the States yet. So I don't know if this is an English thing or an Australian thing. However, I could probably speak to it because of my experience in behavior, that when we start talking about behavior, I think educators see behavior as something that's inherent in someone and not something that's learned or a skill. And so I can see where they're starting to talk about positive support. So they're thinking, why should I just deal with behavior, which might be something that's already there that we're just going to call it positive supports, and it supports for anything and everything. But the history of positive behavior support actually grew out of the aversive techniques that were being used specifically with adults with disabilities in institutional settings. And I think we're ignoring the history of positive behavior support if we take out an important piece that really enhanced and made people start coming up with this approach called positive behavior support. So I'm not sure how much people know of the history, but it emerged from, in the United States, the institutions using aversive practices. And we started talking about, well, these aversive practices are not necessarily going to be the approach, especially things like electric shock that was used a lot in the 80s. And so people started saying there has to be another way that we can use that's more prevention and more positive. And that's where we started doing some research and started realizing that we're going to call this science positive behavior support, because it's more about prevention. It's more about let's get structures in place so that there's no reason for people to have problem behaviors, that we can address things in the culture and the environment. And so I think taking the term behavior out is ignoring the evolution or the ecology of our positive behavior support group. And the second thing is behavior is a skill to be learned just like anything else. And if we start lessening our focus on teaching appropriate and expected behaviors and embedding other cultural interpretations of what this behavior might look like in our culture and how the importance we place in this, if we start taking that away and making it more general, I think we'll lose a lot of what makes positive behavior support the well-researched approach that we now have.